The billionaire froze in the doorway of his private office, his heartbeat suddenly louder than the hum of the city below. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing looked broken. Yet something felt deeply wrong. A presence lingered in the air, as if the room had been touched by a truth he was never meant to face. His eyes landed on a young black girl standing near his desk, quietly examining framed documents that held decades of power, privilege, and silence. In that moment, wealth meant nothing. Authority meant nothing. One unspoken question echoed in his mind, sharp and accusing. Who gave permission to do this? What he was about to discover would unravel not only his empire, but the carefully buried history that built it. And once the truth surfaced, nothing, absolutely nothing, could be undone. Before the story continues, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story for powerful stories that reveal hidden truths. The skyscraper stood like a monument to success, glass and steel piercing the sky in the heart of the city's financial district. It carried the name of a man whose influence extended far beyond boardrooms and stock markets. Jonathan Hale had built his fortune through acquisitions, mergers, and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. To the public, he was a visionary. To competitors, he was untouchable. To employees, he was distant, almost mythical, known more through policies and presence. His office occupied the top floor, designed to reflect control and permanence. Every object inside had been carefully chosen to tell a story of triumph. Awards lined the shelves, photographs of global leaders adorned the walls, and certificates framed in gold testified to decades of achievement. The space was not meant to be questioned or explored by anyone without explicit permission. It symbolized authority, and authority was not something Jonathan believed needed explanation. The girl in the office did not belong to that world. She was young, no older than 16, dressed simply, her posture calm but deliberate. Her skin contrasted sharply with the sterile whiteness of the walls, and her presence alone disrupted the carefully curated narrative of the room. She was not hiding. She was not afraid. She was observing, studying, as if each document held answers she had been searching for her entire life. Jonathan had grown up believing success was earned solely through intellect and grit. That belief had been reinforced at elite schools, private clubs, and closed-door meetings where faces like his were the norm. Race, to him, was a problem society talked about but rarely confronted within the spaces he occupied. Discrimination was something he acknowledged in speeches but never examined in his own assent. The building itself had a history few remembered. Long before Howe's billion-dollar deals, the land had been part of a once thriving black neighborhood. Erased through urban development policies disguised as progress. Generations had been displaced, their stories buried beneath concrete and glass. Jonathan knew none of this, or perhaps had chosen not to know. The girl did. Her name was Amara Lewis, though the name meant nothing to Jonathan at first. She had been raised by a grandmother who believed history lived in documents, deeds, and forgotten records. Her family's past had been shaped by decisions made in rooms like this one, rooms where voices like hers were never invited. Her presence was not an accident. It was a result of years of quiet investigation, late nights in public libraries, and whispered truths passed down through generations. Amara had learned early that the world was not designed to ask permission from people who looked like her. Systems moved forward regardless of who they crushed. Her grandmother had lost a home to a development project decades earlier, compensated with promises that never materialized. That project had eventually evolved into the empire Jonathan now controlled. Security protocols had failed that day, not because of incompetence, but because Amara knew exactly where to go and when. She carried herself not as a trespasser, but as someone reclaiming space that had been taken long before she was born. Jonathan's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Authority demanded confrontation. Ownership demanded answers. Yet beneath the surface anger was confusion, followed closely by unease. The girl was not stealing. She was reading. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. In that silence lived decades of inequality, unacknowledged privilege, and truths carefully avoided. Jonathan had always believed control meant certainty. In that moment, certainty vanished. What unsettled him most was not her presence, but the realization that she seemed to understand his world better than he understood hers. The document she examined told a story he had never bothered to read. And somewhere deep within him, a crack formed in the foundation of everything he believed about his success. The office, once a sanctuary of power, had become a courtroom without a judge, and Jonathan, for the first time in his life, felt like he was the one standing accused. As the moment stretched on, Jonathan's mind raced through protocols and consequences. Trespassing, security breaches, legal ramifications. Yet none of those thoughts brought him comfort. Instead, an unfamiliar discomfort settled in his chest, something dangerously close to guilt. Amara continued her quiet inspection, her eyes moving over framed land deeds and early incorporation documents. She had memorized dates, names, and transactions long before stepping into the office. Each paper confirmed what her grandmother had always said, that wealth did not appear from nowhere, and progress often wore the mask of displacement. Jonathan watched her, torn between anger and curiosity. He had spent his life commanding rooms, silencing opposition with numbers and influence. But the girl did not flinch under his gaze. Her calm unsettled him more than defiance ever could. Memories surfaced uninvited. A meeting years earlier where an acquisition had been rushed through. A neighborhood redevelopment plan approved without community consultation. Numbers on a spreadsheet replacing families, homes, and histories. At the time, it had seemed efficient, necessary, profitable. Now those numbers had a face. The tension escalated as security alarms echoed faintly in the distance. Jonathan raised a hand to stop them remotely, surprising even himself. He did not yet understand why he wanted the interruption delayed. Only that something important was unfolding, something no legal team could contain. Amara's journey had not been easy. She had faced closed doors, dismissed inquiries, and subtle threats disguised as concern. Teachers had warned her not to dig too deep. Archivists had questioned her motives. At every step, she encountered the same unspoken message. This is not your place. But she persisted, driven by a truth larger than herself. Her grandmother's health had faded alongside hope that justice would ever come. Before passing, she had entrusted Amara with a box of documents, old photographs, letters, and a single property deed bearing a name erased from public records. That name had led her here. Jonathan felt his authority slipping, replaced by something unfamiliar, accountability. The girl represented everything his world avoided. Lived consequences. Her presence was a mirror reflecting a version of himself he had never acknowledged. Outside the office, whispers spread. Employees gathered, uncertain whether to intervene. Some felt fear. Others felt something else, recognition. The building housed people from every background, many of whom had quietly endured discrimination masked as corporate culture. Amar's defiance ignited something dormant within them. The narrative Jonathan had carefully crafted for decades began to unravel. Media attention loomed, drawn by rumors of security breach involving a minor. Public relations teams prepared statements, unaware that the truth would not fit into rehearsed apologies. Jonathan attempted to regain control, mentally rehearsing explanations that framed the situation as a misunderstanding. Yet deep down, he knew misunderstandings did not leave this weight behind. What was unfolding was reckoning. Amara reached the centerpiece of the office, a large abstract painting Jonathan had purchased at auction, unaware it depicted the very neighborhood his company had erased. The artist had been a black resident displaced during redevelopment. The irony cut deeper than any accusation could. Jonathan's breath caught. The pieces connected, forming a picture he could no longer ignore. His success had not simply existed alongside injustice. It had grown from it. The tension reached its peak as authorities prepared to enter. Jonathan faced a choice he had never been forced to make before: silence the truth or confront it. In that moment, the office was no longer his alone. It belonged to history, to memory, to those whose voices had been excluded. And Amara stood at its center, not as an intruder, but as a witness. The arrival of security marked a breaking point. Jonathan stood between them and Amara, an act that stunned everyone, including himself. The gesture was instinctive, driven by something deeper than reputation or fear of scandal. It was an acknowledgement, however late, that this moment mattered. The truth spilled out not through confrontation, but realization. Jonathan examined the documents again, this time seeing beyond legal jargon to the lives impacted by each decision. The redevelopment project that launched his empire had been approved through loopholes that exploited racial inequality. Compensation had been intentionally minimized. Legal challenges had been crushed through influence and delay. Amara's presence forced the truth into the open, where it could no longer be dismissed as collateral damage. Jonathan's internal battle was fierce. To admit wrongdoing would dismantle the image he had spent a lifetime constructing. Investors would flee. Board members would revolt. His name, once synonymous with success, would become a symbol of exploitation. But the alternative, denial, now felt unbearable. He saw himself not as a self-made man celebrated in magazines, but as a beneficiary of a system designed to exclude. The realization shattered something fundamental within him. For the first time, he understood that neutrality was a myth and silence was a choice. The tension in the room reached a near breaking point as cameras appeared, drawn by whispers of controversy. The world outside waited, hungry for spectacle. Jonathan knew that whatever happened next would define not just his legacy, but the narrative surrounding countless similar injustices. Amara stood still, her role fulfilled. She had not come for revenge. She had come for truth. Jonathan took a step forward, his voice steady despite the storm raging within. He did not issue commands. He did not deflect. Instead, he acknowledged the history written in the documents, the harm embedded in his company's foundation, and the responsibility he could no longer deny. The admission sent shockwaves through the building and beyond. Markets trembled. Social media erupted. Headlines reframed decades of praise into questions of accountability. For many watching, it was the first time someone in Jonathan's position had chosen honesty over power. The climax was not marked by shouting or arrests, but by something far more radical: acceptance of truth. The aftermath was swift and transformative. Investigations were launched. Restitution funds were established. Properties once seized were returned or compensated at true value. Community leaders were invited into spaces that had long excluded them. Jonathan stepped down from his position, not as a strategic retreat, but as an act of responsibility. His wealth, once a shield, became a tool for repair. It did not erase the past, but it acknowledged it. Amara's story spread far beyond the city. She became a symbol not of rebellion, but of remembrance. Schools invited her to speak, not about trespassing, but about history, courage, and the power of truth. The building itself was renamed, its new identity honoring the community that once stood there. A public archive was created, ensuring that stories like Amara's would never again be buried beneath progress. Jonathan's legacy transformed from unchecked success to a cautionary tale, proof that greatness built on injustice carries a cost, and that accountability, though painful, is the only path forward. The story left viewers with an undeniable truth. Racism does not always announce itself with hatred. Sometimes it hides in policies, profits, and silence. And change begins not when permission is given, but when courage demands action. If this story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story. Your support helps bring these powerful stories to light and ensures that voices long ignored are finally heard.